Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human podcast. On this episode, we're talking with Dr. Jane Muncke, who is the creator and managing director of Food Packaging Forum. We're going to talk about food packaging materials and chemicals, Tetra Paks, cookware, and endocrine disruptors, as well as recycling and lots more. So please stay tuned for this great episode with Dr. Muncke. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest who I know from the past. She's an incredible researcher, but also is the creator and managing director of Food Packaging Forum, a charitable foundation that she set up in 2012 in Zurich, Switzerland. And she's in Switzerland as we speak, which is kind of fun. Jane holds a PhD in ecotoxicology and a master's in environmental science from ETH Zurich. She specializes in science communication about chemicals in all types of food contact materials and articles and their impacts on human health and the environment. So thank you so much, Jane, for being here. Dr. Muncke, hope we're going to call you Jane maybe, or whatever you'd like. So how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for the invitation. It's nice to be here. And I'm scared to now say your name because I know it's Aly, but you said not to call you.
Just Aly is fine.
Aly.
It's really good.
Okay.
Don't worry. It confuses everybody. It's my parents' fault, not my own. But I'm just thrilled to have you here because I think what you do, at least for me, is you sort of bring in a conversation about something that I never thought about, never. Even early on, 10 years ago when I got into environmental health. And now it's become such a major focus of what I look at because, what you don't know, and now I know. So we're talking about chemicals in the contact material, which is food packaging, and why that's an issue, because most of us just focus on food chemicals, if they're even interested, or drinking water chemicals or cosmetic chemicals is such a huge billion-dollar industry. Tell me a little bit about, given your background, how did you get into the world of food packaging chemicals and what drove you to that? Because you've been in it now for almost 14 years now.
Yeah, that's right, Aly. So you can call me Dr. Muncke. So as you said, I actually worked in academic research in environmental science. I trained as an ecotoxicologist. I did my PhD looking at synthetic man-made chemicals that get into the environment through wastewater treatment plants. And I was looking at, the toxicity, the hazard properties. How do these chemicals affect fish? How do they affect aquatic ecosystems and so on? Then once I finished my PhD and I completed a postdoc, I wanted to get out of research for several reasons. I'm not going to bore you with the details. And I wanted to stay in Zurich, so I kind of didn't have a big choice of jobs. And one day my professor phoned me and said, there's this company, they make glass packaging. They're looking for someone with your profile. Give them a call. I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, I don't know. I kind of sort of saw my future in biotech or somewhere there. So anyway, I gave them a call. I scheduled a meeting. I went to the restaurant. So this is 14 years ago. We still had restaurants where we could meet. That was a nice time. And I was there a little bit ahead of time, and I had Googled my contact. I knew what he looked like, chairman of the board of this big impressive company. So I saw him come into the restaurant, and he walks in, takes one look at me, turns around and walks around, goes around. Obviously, I didn't look like the person he was expecting to meet, a scientist. So that was the first fun encounter. But then eventually we connected. And then after 20 minutes, he said, I want to hire you. I'm going to send you a contract. And I'm like, wow, okay. So basically what they had wanted me to do was look at the chemicals in plastic. 2007, the glass packaging industry was struggling because plastic was taking over the market. Plastic was pushing this claim that they are lightweight, which is not a claim, it's a fact, that they had lower CO2 emissions compared to the heavier single-use glass, which is true. And this chairman of the board, he had actually a degree in biochemistry, and so he knew there was something about chemicals in plastic, but he wanted someone to research that. So that's a long story for how I got on the job. The reason why I stayed working on this topic was that, the very same chemicals that I had been researching as an ecotoxicologist, looking at wastewater effluent, concerned about chemicals like bisphenol A, nonylphenols, PFOS, and so on, because of the adverse impacts they had on aquatic ecosystems. Those very same chemicals were being used to make food packaging. And that really and utterly confused me, phthalates and so on. And so I remember, like, the first 4 or 5 weeks on the new job, digging into the scientific literature, reading about food packaging, reading about the chemicals that they put in there. I'd sort of walk into a supermarket here, and I would just stand there and stare and just kind of go like, what the hell am I supposed to eat? The stuff is all full of, things I don't want in my body. And I'd walk out with, a couple of bananas, some oranges, some eggs. So I went on an involuntary diet. And yeah, now fast forward 14 years later, it's something I think about every day. So, and trying to do something about it, but it's not so easy.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because at the beginning of this journey, I had no clue that chemicals were even an issue. I mean, I just assumed, at least in the US, that when it's on the shelf, whatever it is, food or cleaning products or cosmetics, someone did their work. Someone checked to see that this was safe for human
Yeah.
consumption, or to put on our skin, that it wouldn't get absorbed, it wouldn't cause any, hormonal changes or risk for cancers. And when I first understood that, it blew my mind, and I had to keep looking. But when I made this, when I started to understand some of the work that you've done and posted, and you've done so many articles, and really made this a major issue worldwide, we have to understand how these chemicals, number one, what they do, and you'll maybe explain that in what they do with zebrafish and other species, but also what they do to the human body and why that's not such a leap. And then we'll talk about at the end of the show what we do about all of this stuff so people don't get depressed. So tell me a little about the chemicals that you were studying. And pretty much like Rachel Carson, right? If it affects animals, pretty much they're the canary in the coal mine. Why aren't they affecting humans? But tell me a little bit about the most well-studied of the chemicals and what their label now is in terms of disruption of endocrine system.
Well, I think everyone has, I guess, meanwhile heard about bisphenol A. So it's a monomer is the technical term. It's a building block for polycarbonate plastics. So these are sort of, like when you go to a pool restaurant or something, you get something that looks like a glass, but it's plastic. That'll be polycarbonate plastic. This is a glass, by the way. I don't drink from plastic. But it's also used, in like sports drink bottles, the hard plastic ones. It's a great material, polycarbonate, because it's light, it's shatterproof, and it's heat resistant. So you can actually put it in a dishwasher. You can autoclave it if you're working in the lab, which means you can sterilize it basically. And that's actually also how bisphenol A, the building block of that polycarbonate plastic, was rediscovered as being what we call a xenoestrogen. So it's a chemical that can act like the sex hormone estrogen in the human body. That was from a failed lab experiment, 1993, I think. It was folks over in California running their experiments, looking at cells that grow if they're stimulated with estrogen. They took some water, which they had sterilized, in a polycarbonate bottle, which shouldn't contain estrogen, and the cells were growing. And so they realized, wait a minute, there's something leaching from the plastic in that bottle. And then they figured out it's the building block of the plastic. Now, what happens with polycarbonate when you heat it, or just with time, if it gets scratchy and so on? the polymer breaks down, which means, if you imagine a polymer, the backbone of plastics, to be like up to 10,000 repeat units of your monomer, then it's basically just that monomer coming out again out of your big polymer chain. And the bisphenol A is just that, it's the xenoestrogen that had that biological activity. So when I started working in the lab doing my PhD in, when was it, 2002, you mentioned zebrafish. I was working on zebrafish, and we were setting up the zebrafish lab. We got some help from the local university here. Another guy who was doing neuro developmental biology, he had a huge zebrafish facility, and he said, oh, you just take these rat cages. Basically, they're not cages, they're just plastic tubs, and you cut a hole in there so you can get the water out and so on. And that's how we set up our first zebrafish lab, using these plastic containers, lightweight, sterilizable and so on, made of polycarbonate, right? And so I was setting up this lab, and every book you read, every paper, everyone kept saying, oh, zebrafish are so easy because they're so easy to breed. Now, my fish were not breeding. They were just not breeding. And so at some stage, I kind of thought, wait a minute, what's in that water? It's in a plastic container. What's in it? I also hadn't thought about, chemicals leaching from plastic before then. Got my technician to analyze the water, and bam, he found high levels of BPA in there. So that's kind of when I started thinking about this already. But of course, now, as you rightly mentioned, people don't think about food packaging as being a source of chemicals that transfer into food. It's just not something you think about. Actually,
well, it's hard enough, I think, for people to wrap their hands around not eating carbs or sugar. I mean, think about all the levels of decision making when it comes to ingestion.
Yeah.
It's which diet, it's how much percentage of one type of food or another, then it's the regularity of it and how often. And then, the last thing people think about is packaging, because it's just another thing that overweighs their stress, senses. So, but you brought it to the forefront, and at least that's how I learned about it. And now I can't not think about it.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I mean, and nowadays I'm that kind of consumer. When I walk into a shop, I look at the packaging, and I make my purchasing decisions, of course, on what's in the packaging, but also what the packaging is, So obviously.
And what are we supposed to do when the food industry is run by, companies like, for instance, I find the irony of finding, Heinz organic ketchup in plastic. Or, any number of our favorite products that are even organic in plastic. It's such a hypocrisy. It's such a, sort of almost an oxymoron. And then what do you do to those products to clean them up? Is there any way to do, I mean, even meat, of course, meat packaging is in plastic, and, it's very, unless you grow your own food, which has been an option for many researchers. I do know many that we know actually grow their own food because they're just, so fed up with what they've been researching.
Well, I do that. I grow my own food. It's more a hobby. It's not that I'm self-sufficient by any means at all. But I've had friends, tell me, like, when they've been listening to my concerns about packaging, they're like, well, put a cow in your backyard. Like, yeah, I would. No, but seriously, I think, one of the things that your listeners may be interested in is that these chemicals in food packaging, they're actually, in the US, they've been known for 60 years as indirect food additives. So I think 1958, you got your regulation that covered food packaging, and that's where the term indirect food additives was introduced. So, it's been more than 60 years that people have realized that these chemicals in food packaging become part of the food. That's why. indirect food additives. So it's really not new news. I think it's also very much in the interest of food companies to not have their customers think too much about the packaging material. They like them to think about the shape and so on, and the functionality, but not about the material. And so I think that's why no one has really been talking a lot about it. So.
I mean, take canned foods and BPA. BPA as being one of the most well-studied, bisphenol A, one of the most well-studied bisphenols as a class, which was, really important because it's in the lining, even now, of all canned products around the world. I mean, I think it's only 0.01% of all cans that are made with like oleo resin or some type of vegetable derivative. But the rest are all still bisphenol A. And the reason they put that in there is to kind of protect the interior food or drink or what have you from the metal can, aluminum or whatever metals. And so that leaches off into the food that you're holding in those cans. And so tell us a little bit about how that ingestion can affect human health, from what you know.
So cans are a great example, because obviously the can lining is not polycarbonate. It's what they call an epoxy lining. The building block is also, again, or one of the starting substances to make that epoxy lining on the can inside is bisphenol A again. And it's as you said, the cans, or the function of food packaging is to preserve food. That's the original, first and foremost function. When it came up in the 19th century, it was what we would call today a disruptive change, because what did it enable? It enabled human beings to eat foodstuff that were out of season. And it enabled, Napoleon and all those other strong men to fight wars because they could have food at the front without having to have farms there, So food
or
packaging,
refrigeration
yeah, exactly. So food packaging is an incredible, ingenious human invention. So that's really important to understand that. I don't want to kind of, how do you say, bedevil it or anything. It's a good thing, right? For the cans, what can happen is that the food interacts with the metal. And if you have something like tomato sauce, which is acidic, it can degrade the metal, and then the metal becomes brittle and it can't fulfill its function of protecting the food anymore. So that's why we put the epoxy liner on the steel cans or on the aluminum cans to prevent the transfer of metals, as you said. Now, just a quick side note, not all cans are lined on the inside. When you buy like peaches or white fruit, they come in sort of a steel tin alloy. And the shelf life is shorter, but actually the migration of tin is desirable there because it acts as an antioxidant. So it keeps the fruit from oxidizing, turning brown, and so on. So, just for those people who are going to open a can next and say, but there's no liner in there.
Right. No, that's important. And it's because of the light juice, and it is specifically fruit cans, which I found fascinating. If they can do it for that, why wouldn't they do that and extend that to all cans?
Well, again, because you want the longer shelf life, right? So you want the 3-year shelf life, and some foods just are more acidic. So I'm trying to remember what your question. Oh, right, the human health impacts of BPA. Well, here's the deal. BPA is an endocrine disruptor. What does that mean? We mentioned that briefly already. It's a chemical, a synthetic man-made chemical that can, in our body, behave like the natural hormone estrogen. So it can interact with our natural hormone system, which is the fancy term for that is the endocrine system. And so when we say endocrine disruptor, we mean chemicals that are not hormones that can interact with our hormone system, and they can, by doing so, disrupt the hormone system. So that's just to clarify the term. It's a bit complicated to understand. Now, what does the hormone system do? The hormone system does a gazillion things, right? Of course, it's responsible for reproductive health. That's what people associate mostly with it, but it does so much more. It controls our metabolism, for example. And you're a doctor. I mean, you should be talking about this, not me.
Well, I like my audience to hear it from other people and, and their research as well. Your experience matters because, the quite frankly, you have to hear it from a number of
Yeah.
sources to really absorb it anyway, to be honest
That's
with you,
true.
to own it.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I mean, to cut a long story short, the hormone system controls so many different functionalities during development, during adult healthy life. It controls your brain functions, it controls your metabolism, it controls your immune system, because all of those systems are also linked. We've known that for 30 years now, that the nervous system, immune system, and the endocrine system are very closely interconnected. And so a chemical like bisphenol A that can interact with the estrogen receptor, it has a gazillion different effects in the human body, right? It affects the nervous system, it affects the immune system, it affects metabolism, it affects reproduction. BPA also has carcinogenic properties, so it also affects development of cancers of the breast, for example, prostate. So it's really a chemical that I would say shouldn't be in a human body. It just doesn't belong in there. But at the same time, and this maybe sounds scary, I'm sure we all have it in us because it's just so ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
But what's interesting, and it's the most, I think, ubiquitous of chemicals, or at least probably the top 5 worldwide that's still being used. And it's not just in cans, it's in belts and cheap, bags, and it's used as coatings. It's used in cosmetics. It's used in so many things to make plastics hard. Actually, phthalates typically make things more soft and bendable as a plastic. But the interesting thing that I discovered about BPA, because I'm always about the what to do, like what do you do about this horrible problem, is that it actually has a half-life that's 6 to 8 hours, unless I'm incorrect on that. It's not a terribly long half-life like the PFAS or the non-stick chemicals. And therefore, we all have an opportunity, and there's some been great clinical human studies from Harvard and showing that you can actually stop ingestion of canned foods and drinks, and the amount of BPA found in the urine where it's tested drops dramatically.
Yeah.
So although it's everywhere, there's an opportunity at least to make a dent in that exposure.
Yeah, you can flash it out. Yeah, exactly. So, one of the things that I studied and still study is chemical fate. What we call, how chemicals kind of move from one medium to another in the environment. And the same is true for chemicals in our bodies, for example. And so, yes, BPA gets metabolized fairly efficiently, but of course, there's no 100%, right? So a little bit still stays in the body, and because it's fairly fat soluble, it will probably partition into some of your fatty tissue. So that's also just something to be aware of, that I mean, you can get rid of it, but some of it stays in the body and gets out again. Sorry, I don't know how you deal with that, because there's so many more chemicals that are probably fat soluble in human tissue, like with people who want to lose weight. I mean, losing weight is great, right? But do you treat them in a certain way when they're losing weight to deal with the chemicals that are being flushed out?
Well, it's a great question, but one of the emphasis is on losing weight has to be on the food packaging component, because you can do everything right. You can have a great salad, or you can, heat up a really great organic broth, soup, vegetables, but you're heating it in a plastic container. You're defeating the purpose. And I think once people start to understand, as much as you can switch to glass, stainless steel, and of course, good quality glass, good quality stainless steel, because I'm going to go into glass in a little bit, because you taught me something when we saw each other at a meeting in Switzerland. But but the idea is that there has to be some reasonable solutions. It can't just be a throw up your hands and call it
No.
a day. Because we all live here, we all want to live long, and we all want to be healthy, and maybe we want to be thin. But the idea is that as obesogens, as which this class can also be
Yeah.
relabeled as, because they cause fat cells to grow larger, and they also cause stem cells that are the precursor cells in our body to turn into fat
Yeah,
cells.
exactly.
It just behooves us to do whatever we can. And I think that's just one of the chemicals that I felt optimistic about, in the sense that we can try to do something, and the studies do show
Yeah.
that elimination matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, the same is true for the phthalates also, which are not the building blocks of plastics, but these are really additives that go into plastics, but into all other kinds of products also. They're also, I mean, some of the phthalates are very, very ubiquitous, just like BPA. And we have constant exposure to them from food, from cosmetics, but also just from our built environment. And luckily, those have a short half-life as well. And I think if you know what to do, if you're a smart human and you know how to avoid exposures, then you can cut down exposures in a reasonable way. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about this. I mean, I'm not trying to plug my book, but I want people to know that there is a book that talks about how to get rid of this stuff. That's the focus of that
Yeah.
book, is the what to do.
Exactly.
And and a lot of it is just normal physiology, anthropology. It's sweating, it's reduction of exposure, it's clean drinking water to help flush, it's sauna, it's good sleep, where we know we get rid of chemicals during sleep. So, I encourage all those kind of integrative medicine, holistic approaches, because they don't cost money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also add, you should be conscious, be aware of what you eat and how you eat, as much as when you eat, and so on, all of those aspects. But what's also important really is to enjoy life, and food is such a central part of a good life, of a healthy life, and eating good food with your family, with your friends, in good company, it's for me, it's central to good health as well. And so I think once you've figured out how to make it much more enjoyable for yourself, I mean, how to make it healthier for yourself, you should really also focus on making it enjoyable. And so, I would look at it more in sort of in an integrative way. Of course, there's situations like today. I ran out and got a sandwich because I didn't have time to cook lunch, right? So I got a bought sandwich. I do that maybe once a month. I almost never do that. Normally, I cook. I spend time, I get fresh ingredients, I make gnocchi from scratch, we make pizza from our own dough. Like, we really try and enjoy the process of cooking food, of making food, and then enjoying it. So it's kind of, it's not just about, okay, I've got to avoid plastic packaging and the microwave. No, it's actually much bigger. It's a lifestyle in a way, I would say.
I love that you're bringing that in, because the holistic approach, the mental health component of cooking and sourcing your food in a way that you're comfortable with, even if you're buying it, and just figuring out which products are better or not, as healthy. I think that that's making you own it, and I think that's a wonderful message to give this audience. So that being said, I have a question that I wanted to ask you about organic food, which, of course, in this country, in the United States, we have the USDA label for organic. Do you have that in Europe? And how does it, I'm curious to know if people want to use that as sort of their one test of safety that we have available. The only thing in the US we have that has teeth. How does that play out? Is it just enough to have organic food to stay healthy? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the short answer is unfortunately no. I mean, the organic label really is about the way the food is produced. And so that is, I'm all for organically produced food, because as an environmental scientist, I think that my health depends on the health of my environment, of the planet that we live on. And so we should have a healthy planet for healthy people, and vice versa. So I am all for the sort of more traditional, actually it's conventional farming, really, it's kind of pre-industrialized farming. It's called organic, by the way. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It's called organic because you don't use synthetic fertilizers, right? You don't use synthetic sort of the nitrogen that's fixated from the atmosphere using huge amounts of fossil carbon energy. Um, it uses the manure and so on from livestock, and that's actually also a reason why I'm not someone who would encourage you to go totally vegan. I think we have to eat less meat. Definitely, we have to consume less dairy, but there's a role for livestock farming in organic agriculture. Just as a side remark. So yeah, I think organic food is terrific. We need much more of that. I'm worried about the big food companies now starting to buy up organic labels and brands, because to me that's not really compatible with organic food production. That it doesn't agree with sort of globalized business models. So yeah, try and get organic food, but then also try and get food that is as little processed as possible. Why? Because during food processing, you also have man-made synthetic materials that get in contact with food. And there, like from packaging, you get this phenomenon of migration or chemical transfer. And so as a rule of thumb, the more processed a food is that you're buying, the more chemical contaminants it will contain. And not just, if it's packaged in a glass bottle, if it's highly processed, it's, it's still an issue. So that's something that we really need our regulators to address much more. A good example, I forget which brand it was, but it's probably better. Some American brand for, I think, mac and cheese, like a week or two ago, they came out with a statement that they were working with their supply chain on getting rid of phthalates in the food processing equipment, which that's exactly the
Wow.
conversation that we need to have. I'll dig it
Well, if
out
it's
for you.
Kraft macaroni and cheese, I grew up on that like it was a food group. So
I don't think it's
that's
that. I think
interesting.
it's
It was a different brand.
Annie's or something. Let me dig it out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be Annie's is one of the they do a lot of organic
Mm,
foods, and they're very popular in the US,
yeah.
which is great because they have a lot of options. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to be sexier as companies start to realize, just like clean beauty, for instance, has become a huge area. I think we're going to start to see clean food packaging
Mm,
at some point when this infiltrates into the community as something that has value. But again, it's not quite there yet. We're on our way, but maybe food, it starts with food and then we move into food packaging. But would you recommend, I mean, I think about this when I buy, meat or something at the supermarket, or even like organic, turkey
mm,
slices or a brisket I cooked the other day came in plastic packaging. The quality of the meat may be good. It's maybe grass fed, grass
mm,
finished, all those kind of things. But I wash off all of my food that's capable of being washed
mm.
off, just in fact, in case the plastics from the packaging itself is remnant on the
Yeah.
surface. I mean, there's no testing that I know of that really makes that much of a difference. It's probably infused into the food, but I mean, does it make sense to take an extra step if you are going to be, buying packaged food that you have no control over to go ahead and wash these products as you cook before you cook them?
Well, if anything, if it makes you feel better, by all means. I think I think there's a couple of scientific principles which we understand very well, that can help us decide whether there's a risk of high migration or not. And we've actually got a great, or I like to think it's great. I'll let you decide if it's great, a fact sheet on that, for everyday people that's really understandable, explaining.
We'll put that on our
Yeah,
we'll put it on the announcement for the
yeah,
yeah, in the
great.
information.
And it
Perfect.
explains the four main principles that will drive up migration. So the first one is heat. So if you're buying something that was filled into the packaging when it was hot, or if you heat it in the packaging, or if it's hot food and you're buying it, then there will be higher migration. The second one is the chemistry of the food. So what's important to understand is that bisphenol A and phthalates and so on, they're made from fossil carbon, right? Fossil carbon as in oil, oil that is pumped from the ground. Um, that in itself, oil is fat soluble, right? And so the chemicals that are made from this fossil carbon oil are usually also very fat soluble chemicals. So if you put something that is fatty into plastic packaging, you will get higher migration of those kinds of chemicals because, fat soluble chemicals will migrate into fatty food. And here it's important to also understand you don't have to have 100% fat in the packaging. When you have 25% fat content in your food, you will almost get 100% migration of the fat soluble chemicals. So if your food contains fat, it may have higher migration. The third aspect is the storage time. So if you're putting something into, I don't know, a cardboard box, for example, or a plastic bag, and you're storing it for 3, 4, 5 years, you will have higher migration from the printing inks, from your adhesives that were used to glue on the label or glue the cardboard together, or from the chemicals in the paper, in the cardboard, or in the plastic. So, I mean, that's an easy one. If you're buying rice or flour or something, just tip it into your stainless steel or ceramic or glass container at home if you want to store it for a long time. And the fourth principle is maybe a bit less intuitive. It's got to do with the serving size. So if you imagine like I'm in Europe, so we have the metric system, like a 12 ounce, I'm going to say. 1 liter is about a 12 ounce, right? If you've got a beverage carton with milk inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the inside is plastic
Okay.
of
Yeah.
the beverage carton.
We call it a
A
quart, but
quart,
yeah.
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 So
Go
the
ahead.
inside is plastic, right? It's outside is cardboard, inside is plastic. And your packaging has a ratio to the volume of food. So you've got a packaging surface that has a ratio to the volume of food. Now, if you shrink that down to, I don't know, 3 ounces maybe, make it a little juice box size, you are increasing the ratio of your packaging surface area to the volume of food. So you have smaller size packaging, which will have proportionally higher levels of migration. So now think about, single serve salad sauces that you get in tiny little containers, usually made of plastic.
Right.
It's oil,
Right.
oil, right? Maybe more than 50% oil, and it's in a tiny, tiny little packaging. So that's something you can.
Or children's children's foods.
Yeah.
Like you said, little juice boxes, little containers that are single serve, even I guess yogurts and things that are not necessarily for kids. But that's a
Yeah.
really interesting point because people don't think that
Mm.
volume can help dilute out those chemicals a
Yeah.
little bit per
Yeah.
serving. And so really you're looking for the bigger, if you have to go with the bigger bottle, then that may be a little bit less as one component of your thought
But
process, one
yeah,
maybe less
if you
toxic.
can consume it all, hey, I mean that's also.
Yeah.
But and so I mean to
Right.
get back to your example of your brisket wrapped in plastic, and I think I I think there are really good reasons for using plastic packaging. So when it comes to meat or even poultry, I don't want to get salmonella poisoning, really not. I am grateful for that to be wrapped in plastic. It's fatty, okay, but it's not hot. And if you get it at the butchers, I don't know if you guys have that, but we at the supermarkets here, we have butchers, and the meat probably comes wrapped in plastic, but then they unwrap it and put it out in the counter, and then you just choose how much you want. And then you have it wrapped in sort of classified paper or something. Leave it in the fridge
Right.
in that it's probably going to be okay. You really don't want to get some kind of microbacterial contamination on there. So yeah, it's just healthy
Yeah, it's a
balance. Yeah.
trade-off. Right. Everything's a trade-off. And I love the balanced stance you take on the fact that, packaging has really made a difference in so many ways, not just for storage and for feeding underserved
Mm.
communities and third world nations, but it has a microbial and viral, microbi I can't even
Microbial.
speak today. It's too early. Thank you, Jane, Dr. Muncke. But yes, it really does serve a purpose that I didn't mention, and you did so beautifully, because we are we have to protect ourselves from the infectious risks that especially when you have the kind of farming, at least in the U.S., where you're talking about huge agribusiness of chickens, thousands of them together, and cows, and so really, we have a big issue with antibiotic overuse, which means bacterial resistance. And so when we have these food packages that are plastic, maybe there's a blessing there. The question is there anything to do right after it's unpackaged, and can we, eliminate some of those chemicals? I think it's definitely variable, again, like you said, on food substance and how long it's been sitting there, and all that. But we're all looking for empowerment, against this very big monster.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, if you don't mind, about glass, because I sat with you at a meal and we talked about glass, and I talked to you about how I have this crazy awesome setup of my tea kettle for my loose leaf tea. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember this. And you were just telling me about how lead and some other issues can be part of glass, even though it's clear. And we're all told, I say it all the time, glass and stainless steel, switch out plastics to those. Tell us, are there any issues with glass that we should be aware of, or even, companies that use porcelain, Le Creuset and Corning, and but also you mentioned something about, was it baking soda
Citric acid.
Sodium bicarb?
Yeah, citric acid.
When you said when I get glass. So tell me what you told me, because my jaw dropped, because here I was thinking I was doing it so right.
No, I mean, I love glass. I use it a lot. I love stainless steel. In fact, I have my stainless steel tea.
So do I. Yes.
Tumbler here that I've used for, I don't know, 15 years or so. The thing is that, this issue of chemical transfer and migration, it happens for all the different materials, but it also depends on the material properties. And so glass and stainless steel are what some people have started calling permanent materials. Permanent in the sense of you can grind them down, you can remelt them, you can make them into the same product over and over again. They don't lose their material properties. They are inert materials because you need a lot of heat to kind of make them, right? A lot of energy goes into making them. And inert in the sense means that they don't interact with their environment. So if you put food in there, the migration that you will get happens only on the surface. So the materials, they don't absorb chemicals from the food like plastic does, for example. Like if you've put tomato sauce into a white Tupperware container ever and then taking it out, you see that it stains red, right? That's because the pigments get absorbed. That doesn't happen with glass, and it doesn't happen with stainless steel. So it doesn't absorb, and it doesn't release. But you get a surface exchange. So if you've got something on the surface, in your glass tumbler, for example, or bottle or stainless steel container, you can get this exchange from the surface. Now, what are we talking about? So glass is made of sand. That's the main ingredient to make glass. And sand naturally contains a low level of certain heavy metals like lead, for example. So it's present naturally, geogenically is the technical term, in sand. It's a very low level, but it's there. And of course, we know that no level of lead exposure is safe, right? Lead is a toxic chemical. We don't want it. Now, so that's the trade-off you were talking about. So what do I do when I get like a new glass dish or ceramic or stainless steel bottle or container? I boil some water, and then I put just a tablespoon of citric acid into the water and let it sit there for a couple of hours, and then pour it out. What happens? If there are any heavy metal ions on the surface of the glass container, they will get complexed by the citric acid, which means the citric acid basically kind of builds a little fence around those ions. I don't know how to explain that better, but it kind of, it makes them go into the water with the citric acid, and they get complexed in there. And then the surface is clean, and at least to most extent, and you also don't get migration from the bulk of the material. So that was a very long explanation. I don't know if that makes sense, but
But you do this only
yeah,
one time, and I'm looking. Yeah, I mean, so citric acid, I'm looking up, is basically a weak organic acid. So it's an acidic component, basically. And would you say that comes from just citrus, like lemon juice,
you could do
orange
it with
juice,
lemon
grapefruit
juice. It
juice?
does. It's present in lemon juice. Yeah. It's one of the acids together with the vitamin C or ascorbic acid, which makes lemon juice sour, taste sour. So
Okay. And you can buy it.
you buy it.
I'm actually
Yeah.
looking it up, and you buy it as a bag, or as there's plenty of companies that make it, and you just basically make it. You say hot water
Yeah,
with citric acid does the trick, and you only
just
need
a
to,
little bit. I mean,
and you only,
I
yeah, and you just once, not every
no,
time. You don't
not
have to
every
repeat
time.
this
No, no.
process.
I mean, if like, if you really want to make it absolutely safe, you do it 3 times in a row, and then you're done for life. You're good for life. There shouldn't be any migration from the bulk then. Um,
And it's only for
no,
glass, or is that also
use it.
includes porcelain, for
Sure.
ceramics, and
Use it.
companies that
Yeah,
use.
use it for all those sort of inert materials. I guess enamel, that's just a type of ceramic. It should work for all of those. I always have a batch of citric acid at home because I use it to decalcify my kettle. It's wonderful also for cleaning, like cleaning in the bathroom and so on. It's one of those really useful natural chemicals.
That's wonderful. I mean, and that was going to be at the end of the program, but I'm glad we got into it because that's such a usable piece of information. So thank you for sharing that about glass and porcelain, and how to manage that a little bit better. Tell me a little bit, as we switch topics a little bit. Tell me about recycling, recycling of plastic materials. And as you mentioned, the fate of chemicals. This is one area where people don't think much about the fate of chemicals once they've gotten rid of their single-use plastic. Or tell me what the problems are that we're not really thinking of, and what we could possibly do better about that.
Well, it's late on a Friday afternoon here, so maybe I'm getting a bit tired, but I'm gonna make that really short. To me, recycling
Okay.
recycling is basically, it's the fig leaf of consumerism, to be very crass and direct. Why do I think that? Well, because we buy products and then we think, oh, I can recycle the packaging by sort of putting it into a certain bin. That's not recycling. You're sorting it, right? Recycling happens when that material gets converted into the same product again. And that almost never happens for plastic. Almost never. It doesn't happen enough for glass in the US. In Switzerland, we're a bit better. We have, I think, 96% recycling rate for glass here. In the US, I think you're somewhere around
Wow.
30. So that's still something to work on. But I'm not a fan of recycling, neither for glass nor for plastic. The chemicals, you mentioned that's an issue. We get this absorption of chemicals into plastic and into paper. And so I actually think those materials, sure, you can recycle them. Don't recycle them into food packaging, please. That's not a good idea. I would advise strongly against that. Better not to use them if you don't have to. The best option is reuse. It's that, and that's, I think we need to kind of shift our economy. In Europe, they're talking about the circular economy. We need to change business models so that they enable reusing materials, not just recycling them. recycling comes after you can't reuse anymore. But we need to design processes and business models so that they allow for using refillable containers. So, that you get something like this for your coffee, for your takeout coffee. There's a deposit on it, $5 or $10, I don't know. And then you either keep it or you return it, and next time you go to the same shop, you get a clean container to go again, and so on. And this whole idea of recycling being somehow better for the environment, it's greenwashing. I mean, someone once said, I forget who it was, it's like reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's feel good.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And we do it. I mean, our neighborhood, I mean, we have all this stuff packed up every week. And, we want to know that we're doing something, but we don't always see that the end result is so fantastic.
I also do it. And, I'm sorry for being so crass. But I mean, let's cut the bullshit, really. I mean, it's like we shouldn't be producing single-use materials regardless of recycling them or not.
Yeah, there's a big campaign, at least I've seen on commercials now, with the plastic beverage industry in the US, where they get out there and they're trying to show everyone, we're going to put them back into the same bottle. And, I sit there and I shake my head, probably the way I think we need a drink. You know that, Jane? So, but it's Friday there, but it's not 10 a.m. here, but I'm ready to drink. Yes, I know. Unfortunately, I have one quick question, and then we'll finish up. Just real quick about Tetra Paks. They fascinate me. I know they can be using, the recycling codes in this country go from 1 to 7. I don't know if you use the same recycling codes in Europe, but essentially that's all we have for guiding ourselves. So it's usually Pete 1, Pete 2, number 1 or 2 with the triangle on the interior. But Tetra Paks, how do we wrap our brains around Tetra Paks in terms of human health, or even how to swap those out? I mean, should we stay away from them?
I tried to. And I don't want to attack the brand. There's several companies that make the beverage cartons. Our technical term for them is multi-layer, multi-materials, which already tells you what they are. So they're kind of different materials glued together. An ingenious invention, really an ingenious invention, but it uses fresh fiber cut down from monoculture forests. So I'm not a big fan of that. And it uses sometimes aluminum, which that you can actually take out of it. That's the one that really is worthwhile to repurpose by recycling. Never goes back into another Tetra Pak though. And it contains, as a direct food contact material, it contains plastic. And it's glued onto the aluminum or onto the cardboard. So that you've also got the chemicals in the glues. An interesting thing about the beverage cartons also is that they're printed on the outside, right? And so when these are printed, they're not cut into the little square containers or rectangular containers yet. They're printed on huge sheets. So you've got these big rolls of multi-layers printed on the outside. And after they're printed, they get rolled back together again. And now see what happens. You've got the outside printed touching your inside direct food contact layer, right? It's like when you stack a printed paper cup into another paper cup, you've got the outside, the printed outside, touching the other container's food contact inside. That's another source of chemicals in your food. It's set-off migration, basically. So you don't have to have the chemicals go through all those layers, which they couldn't if you've got aluminum, but if you roll it up like that, so that's something to be concerned about. Some companies make sure that the printing inks are really dry before they do the rolling up, but others don't. And then in terms of recycling. Now, it's a multi-layer, multi-material. So basically, you can't turn it into the same product again. For me, recycling is I can take a glass bottle and I can make a glass bottle out of it again, or I can take a stainless steel container and I can make a stainless steel container out of it again. You cannot do that with the Tetra Pak. You can recover some of the materials. The plastic, you can't do anything with. The aluminum, we talked about already. The fiber, I think they can maybe turn it into some other kind of product. But it's in that sense, it's a non-recyclable container.
And Tetra Paks are different from, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but Tetra Paks are different than, say, a common milk carton. I mean, a milk carton is similar. It has a plastic coating on the interior to protect it from the cardboard. But when Tetra Paks are really thicker, they're like a much thicker component, and they still have the plastics.
They always have plastics, because if you've got a fluid in there, I mean, the cardboard is going to dissolve in a fluid, so you've got some kind of chemical treatment. Also with these paper bottles, that they're talking about now, or molded fibers.
Or coffee cups. What about coffee cups? I mean, coffee cups have to be layered with people. I mean, or Chinese food takeout. I mean, people don't realize about Chinese food takeout has to be covered with either a PFAS plastic component to make it degreased, so that the grease doesn't go through. I mean, same with, fast food wrappers. There has to be something that keeps the food from seeping into the cardboard container.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. So we got to just avoid all of the junk food and try to stick to glass and milk and glass. I mean, that's available in many supermarkets, and try to do better when it comes to thinking about food packaging for ourselves, for our bodies.
Well, I mean, you're the medical doctor, Aly, but I think every once in a while you can do something that's unhealthy if it's fun. You know what I mean?
Of course.
But don't do it on a daily basis.
Girl, 80-20. No, I look at life. I mean, I always say I color my hair. I look at life as 80-20. We're in a position where you have to, and that might be too high for some people, trust me. But I can tell you that just making an effort in very low energy, practical maneuvers can often be very rewarding physically in terms of your chemistry, but also psychologically. My beer that's organic tastes just better to me than a non-organic beer. I just like the taste better. Last question. Tell us something, on a high note, tell us something about yourself that this audience might not know, because you're this fantastic researcher. And I think it's always nice to get to know people behind their degrees and all of their, highfalutin work. So tell me a little, and I saw some of this stuff on your resume. So if you don't reveal it, I might, but go tell me a couple of cool things.
I'm trying to think what it was that you saw on my resume. So I used to be a rowing coach. I mean, you know me, you've met me in person. I'm not very tall, right? I'm average height, I would say. Maybe not in Sweden. There I'd be small, but
you're like 5'2" or 5'4", I think, right?
I think 5'6" or 7. 5'6" or 7,
5
5.
Really? 5'6"? Yeah. Okay. All right. You're bigger than me. But go ahead.
Sorry. I used to be a rowing coach. So I used to, when I was a teenager, I rowed, not professionally because I was a kid still, but I trained every single day. I was out there on the water, rain or shine. I remember rowing practice where the water would freeze on our blades. Like droplets of water would freeze on where you hold the oars, the scull, they're called, and the droplets of water would freeze, and we weren't allowed to wear gloves. So we were out there training and freezing our fingers off and so on. So and my coach used to say, "What doesn't kill you makes you tougher or stronger." So that's a bit of my background. Maybe that's why I've kind of become so persistent working on this packaging thing.
Well, I think coaching like that makes you tougher and puts up with a lot of the BS that you've experienced. So I think that's not a bad thing to be tough.
Keep
like
it real,
that,
The other thing that I did for many years, 15 years, was improvisational theater. I started doing that when I was a student, and I did it until my professional life became too dominating, and I just felt like, okay, now I guess it's time to focus on one career. But I enjoyed it. I did it for many years. I played hundreds of shows, and I miss my improv group friends, and I miss all the fun that we had together. Sometimes I think maybe my life's become a bit too serious. I need a bit more of that improv spirit. But anyway.
I think you, yeah, but you also put that into your experience as a science communicator and a presenter, and you teach people how to really relay information that's maybe a little tough or, confusing, but it seems to me that you add that kind of energy from your history as an improv person into the work you do even now. So I think that's
Yeah,
awesome.
well, thank you. I don't feel like I did a good job at explaining the details today, but let me tell you this. I think like rowing, communicating, you're never finished. Like you've never perfected it. There's always something that you can make better, where you can improve. And that's also something that I did, like every single show we played or every single race that I rode, we always had a debrief. Even if it was a great show or we won the race, we all sat down and thought, what could we have done better? Like, and keep the standard high for yourself. And I think that's also something that really helps to, constantly try and get better and better. Not talk too much. That's one
That's
of
a
the things
one.
I should do.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful way to end the show. And I'll tell you something, whatever you think about this interview, I thought it was spectacular. And I've interviewed quite a few people, but the people that I enjoy speaking with, I would say the most, are the people that really give the story and also give the solutions. And you gave us plenty of ideas to think about. So thank you so much for taking the time from Zurich. And this was a really fun thing to set up, but I really appreciate it. So thank you, Dr. Jane Muncke, for all of your work. And how can people reach you? Is there something, we're going to have some resources, of course, but if they want to read more about your foundation, which is the Food Packaging Forum, FPF, and the kind of work you do and where you might be in the future in terms of speaking engagements and that kind of thing, please let us know where is that online.
I have a Twitter account that I'm using a lot. I've just started a YouTube video blog, which is really, it's challenging, but also very rewarding. So they'll look out for more material there. Just come to our website, I guess. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook with Food Packaging Forum. We also have a Twitter account for Food Packaging Forum. So yeah, I think those are right now the only places to find us. But at some time, this pandemic will be over, and hopefully then we will meet in person again. Dr. Aly Cohen, thank you so much. Thanks for the great work
My pleasure.
you're
And
doing.
again, oh, please. I am inspired by the people I've met along this journey, and you are absolutely one of them. So it was a no-brainer. Listen, be well and be safe, and hopefully we will see each other soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Muncke.
Yes, likewise to you. Bye, Dr. Cohen.